Before we get started, there will be spoilers for the 1000-Year Blood War arc of Bleach and some of the supplementary material for Bleach in the video to come. By the time we reach the 1000-Year Blood War arc, the power levels are practically off the charts. The Sternritter were introduced as the newest villainous faction, a group of elite Quincy soldiers empowered by drinking the blood of their god king in an occult ritual that engraves a letter upon their souls. These letters, the Schrift, are perhaps the most consequential new addition to the series as of the final arc, laying the groundwork for the Sternritter's entire power system. Thanks to his ability to see words of power emblazoned upon the souls of others, Yhwach is able to bestow upon his children something that completes them, by carving a letter into their very being, thus awakening an incredible ability unique to that Sternritter. There's no doubt about it. The Schrift are some of the most broken and wild abilities we have ever seen in Bleach. In fact, 2 years ago when I ranked what I believe to be the top 10 most broken abilities in the series, 4 Schrift made the list, and in fact made up the entirety of the top 3 placements. The manic, eclectic abilities of the Sternritter truly do run the gamut, and feature just about everything and anything you could imagine. And so today I wanted to embark on the unenviable task of trying to rank what I believe to be the most broken Schrifts in Bleach. In company such as this, where almost all of these powers are truly impressive and frankly insane in their own right, which stand out from the rest? Which Schrifts are the most powerful, the most broken of the bunch? Before we begin, I want to set a few ground rules. Firstly, no, Yhwach the Almighty will not be considered. Let's face it, it's number 1, big surprise. My second piece of housekeeping, however, is that I want to try and separate the Schrift from the Sternritter as best I can, and look at the abilities in a standalone light. This might be tricky to do, as the abilities themselves are inherently born from and tied to their particular Quincy, but we'll give it our best shot. Anyway, without further ado, let's take a trip into the weird and wacky world of the Quincy and their holy powers. This was a very tough list to make. Like I said, many of the Schrift feel extremely overpowered in their own way, and there were so many others that I felt could have easily been here. So make sure to let me know your thoughts and lists down in the comments. Right, let's begin then, kicking things off of course with our 2 honourable mentions. First up then we have The Love, which I think goes pretty underrated, not least because of the Sternritter that it's attached to. But separating The Love from Pepe shows us that it is truly one of the more dangerous and sinister Schrift of the bunch, giving its user the potential for complete control. In some ways, The Love is a more powerful, more free-form version of the Zombie, which is another extremely strong Schrift. In fact, The Love features all of the controlling powers of the Zombie, with none of the drawbacks or hurdles. Seemingly without limit and with very little barrier of entry, which is going to be a recurring theme in this video, The Love allows the user to take over the hearts of anyone it touches, forcing them to do your bidding. The Love will convince the victim to continue pushing and fighting for you, even through serious debilitating injury, as they essentially give themselves over to you and your cause. Unlike the Zombie, The Love works on anyone right away, Shinigami or Quincy without question, and it even works on Zanpakuto as well. We don't know if there are any kinds of limits with The Love at all. Is there a cap on how many people can be under its spell at once? Does it perhaps wear off after a while? Sadly, while we don't know, The Love is clearly strong enough to make an honourable mention spot, in my opinion. Now, as for our second honourable mention, I wasn't originally going to have the Glutton make this list at all. Sure, the ability to warp your jaw, transforming it into an eldritch monstrosity capable of devouring just about anything, is pretty powerful, but I never really considered it anything more than that. We see Lil Toto using it to feast upon an entire squad of Gotei 13 officers, and then later she devours Pepe with ease, but for whatever reason in that moment he doesn't try and put up a fight at all. How useful really is the glutton then outside of specific, almost situational circumstances? Well, thanks to Can't Fear Your Own World, the glutton has an entirely new side to it. One that does, in my opinion, make it pretty broken. It's revealed that the user of the glutton assimilates the powers and abilities of the people they eat. In this example, Lil Toto acquired the ability of the love by consuming Pepe, as well as the poison secretion powers of Loli's Escolopendra after eating just one of the tentacles of her Resurrection. Now, that is ridiculous, giving the wielder of the glutton the capacity for limitless evolution in a way that feels very similar to Aranyero's Glottonoria, even allowing a Quincy to feast upon a supposedly toxic hollow and gain their abilities as a result. And so, like I said, it is very similar to Glottonoria, but perhaps even easier to use. Did Lil Toto acquire the Zanpakuto abilities of every member of the 11th Division she devoured during the second invasion? I see no reason to say otherwise, and this is a Schrift then that if left unchecked would be completely overpowered in the right hands. Moving on then to our top 13, we have a peculiar Schrift in that it doesn't originate from the source material. However, I figured if I was looking at the supplementary material for the glutton as we just did, then I had to talk about this power too. It is only fair. And that's the viability or the stigma found in the beginning of the Revive of Tomorrow. This power is again fairly simple, as often the strongest abilities are. Any damage inflicted upon the user is automatically repaired by absorbing the reishi around them, including even the ability to replace lost limbs. Shaz Domino even uses this power to escape from Gremmy's control, which in my opinion is probably the most impressive aspect, replacing each part of his imagined body with real limbs made of reishi, which is pretty crazy and implies the imagined creations of Gremmy's the Visionary are attached to him via strings of some sort, like a marionette or something. This eternal automatic healing makes it so the user essentially can't die. But that's really all it offers at the end of the day. And I know that sounds like a crazy thing to complain about, if you can even really call it that, but that just goes to show the caliber of abilities on this list. In some ways, it feels like a lesser, more constrained version of the zombie almost, a slightly less versatile, but still incredibly potent and useful reimagining of just one aspect of that Schrift. The fact that Shaz frees himself from Gremmy's control in such a way implies he's able to replace and repair his internal organs and even the likes of his head, which does make him extremely durable, the likes of which is virtually unseen elsewhere, and is the kind of broken that definitely makes it into this video. Okay, but moving on to number 12, we have one of the first major Schrifts to really leave an impact in the source material, one of the first ones we were acquainted with, the Fear. The Fear is a very simple ability again, and another one with a very low barrier of entry. Simply by striking someone once with a Reishi Thorn, Asnod was capable of inflicting primal, instinctual fear on his enemies. Even a Shinigami as powerful as Byakuya was completely helpless in the face of the fear, warding it off through sheer resolve for a time before succumbing in the end. This fear is so crippling that the victim doesn't stand a chance once it takes effect. And on lower level opponents, the fear kills them outright by bursting their hearts. The victim of the fear is consumed by innate fear that attacks them without reason, and therefore there is very little, if nothing at all, to guard against. There's no cause to identify nor overcome. It's just an animalistic urge to be afraid. For added effect, the victim is plagued by horrific visions that paralyze them in their tracks, leaving them wide open to further attack. Even after being blasted through the chest, Byakuya was still so ensnared by the fear that he simply stood there, his eyes wide with horror, barely registering his injury. The fear ended up overtaking him completely, sending the usually composed captain into a reckless rage that left him easy prey for As not to finish off. Don't forget that even Rukia, who had just been trained in the royal palace, ended up succumbing to the fear in the end, as it creeped into her head and overtook her, causing her to lose her mind until she was rescued at the last moment. Were it not for that intervention, the fear would have surely claimed another victim. Up next, we have a slightly weird one, another Schrift that tends to fly under the radar somewhat, yet to me seems to be completely broken. And that's the jail. This is one of the most situational Schrifts of the bunch, really, in that its usage feels somewhat limited. It's not a Schrift to be used in the midst of battle per se, which is perhaps why Kirige was so talented in other areas, but when it is used successfully, it is basically game over. By firing a single arrow that appears to look just like any other arrow, the user can trap their opponent within a bright blue cage of reishi, completely sealing them off from the outside world. The arrow simply needs to find its mark for the cage to activate, trapping its victim inside. The prisoner's spiritual pressure disappears, and they can no longer be contacted nor heard by anyone outside. That sounds crazy enough as it is, but there's more to this cage than meets the eye. The jail persists even after its user is dead, and the cage is seemingly impossible to escape from. Even numerous point-blank Getsuga Tensho while Ichigo was in bankai did absolutely nothing to it from the inside, instead rebounding and injuring Ichigo over and over as he tried frantically to break free. This tells me the cage can only be disengaged by the wielder, and so is designed to last, potentially forever. I'm sure someone would have found a way to free Ichigo eventually, but in the short term this seems to be an impenetrable prison capable of trapping, well, anyone. Ichigo was outclassing Kirige big time during their battle, and yet even a heavily injured Kirige, who was on the verge of death, was able to imprison Ichigo with ease, a fighter who was much more powerful than him. Up next, in 10th place, we have a Schrift that we've already talked about somewhat in this video, the zombie. Now, while the zombie is similar to the love in that it allows the user to control others, there are significant differences. Again, the barrier to entry is fairly low, albeit not as low as some of the previous entries on the list. The user simply needs to splash their blood on a Shinigami to turn them into their corpse puppet, at which point the Shinigami loses all autonomy. However, this is only where Shinigami are concerned. In order to control a Quincy, said Quincy must be dead first. That's definitely a weakness in comparison to the love's blanket ability to control anyone with ease. But where that encompasses the love entirely, this is just one facet of the zombie. Its true strength lies in its incredible versatility. While the zombie and the love are quite similar, allowing both users to amass an army of slaves essentially, they differ in one crucial area: the effect they have on their wielder. The love doesn't really give the wielder themselves any real advantages, meanwhile, the zombie basically turns the user undead. As we see with Giselle on numerous occasions, the zombie makes its user virtually impossible to kill, and they're capable of surviving otherwise clearly fatal wounds, such as their body being split apart or being stabbed through the heart. Not only that, but the zombie allows the user to heal other people as well by controlling and utilizing the flesh of nearby bodies, helping them to stitch injuries back together again, or, as we see in in the case of Candice, go so far as to create them a brand new limb from scratch in a few seconds. The zombie has so much going for it that it had to make the list. Now, in my opinion, from this point onwards, the Schrift kind of go crazy. They ascend to a totally different level of power. You thought the Schrift prior to this were busted? Think again. We're entering a whole new dimension of strength. And speaking of strength, we have the Superstar, another Schrift with seemingly limitless potential. The Superstar creates a fan or a hero to assist the user, depending on which version you subscribe to, more on that in a minute, and the two beings then work in tandem to achieve their full power. As the fan cheers their hero on, the wielder of the Superstar grows stronger and stronger, their power increasing exponentially. The details are a little thin on the ground where the Superstar is concerned, but we're able to see the kind of astronomical leaps and bounds this power is able to provide its user in the source material. Mask de Masculine goes from struggling to fight several Vice Captain level characters to completely wiping the floor with two Vizard captains, both of whom were using bankai after just a few cheers from James on the sidelines. He even forced Renji, who had just returned from his training in the Royal Palace, to use bankai, and likely would have been able to keep fighting against even that had Mask not accidentally killed James, rendering himself vulnerable. The truth is that we don't really know how the Superstar works on a granular level. Just how much of a power boost do the fans' cheers really provide? Does that boost disappear over time, or is it permanent? Everything about the fan is designed to facilitate this power, however. James is unkillable for the most part, a weird amorphous blob who splits into a small army of clones in order to amplify the effects of his cheers more and more. And that's why I've personally never really bought into the whole James is the true Sternritter thing from Club Outside. It doesn't feel like Kubo wrote it that way in the actual chapters themselves. The evidence is right there. James is a weird, alien-like creature who seems to exist solely for the purpose of enabling the Superstar, and who, without him, Mask de Masculine finally becomes killable. If James were the true Sternritter, surely it should be the other way around. Surely Mask would vanish the moment he wiped James out for good. If James were the true Sternritter, then why was it Mask present at the two Sternritter meetings? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Regardless of who is using it, it seems to me that the Superstar is monstrously powerful. Okay, in 8th place we have the first Schrift that isn't technically a true Schrift. The compulsory isn't a power that was bestowed upon Pernida by Yuhabak. It was a power Pernida already possessed on account of it being the left arm of the Soul King. So to be honest, I wasn't even sure if I should really consider it. However, considering I've included several other characters on the list and we're looking at the supplementary material and all of that, it only felt fair in the end, and I wanted to encompass all the Schrift in the series, barring the Almighty itself. Anyway, despite the compulsory originating from the Soul King and his power of progression, I've always felt it was one of the most balanced Schrifts of the bunch, which is why it's only clocking in on this list at number 8, which is still pretty high overall. To my mind, the compulsory is very powerful, very dangerous, and yet feels oddly fair. I don't know, maybe I'm off base with this one, but I've always felt it was one of the best constructed Schrifts of the lot, with fairly well-defined powers and boundaries. The compulsory utilises nerves to compel the user's opponents to do whatever they want. In the context of the source material, this generally means forcing the opponent's limbs to contort wildly, snapping and breaking until there's absolutely nothing left. And this power can extend to the victim's entire body as well, if given enough time. This is a terrifying and grotesque ability, though it definitely feels less threatening overall once the secret of how it works is revealed. The nerves can cover entire areas and reduce fully grown adults to a bloody mess in a matter of seconds, and would have killed the likes of Kenpachi Zaraki even had he not ripped his own arm off. Even so, the compulsory was able to defeat Kenpachi in record time, destroying both of his legs as well. The compulsory can even affect inorganic material, as we see when Pernida uses its nerves to entrap Mayuri within 2 gigantic stone hands, meaning the entire battlefield becomes an accessory to this power. The tricky part for me comes in the separation of the compulsory and Pernida, even more so than most others on this list. If this isn't a true Schrift and originates from Pernida itself, then where does the compulsory end? Do Pernida's evolutionary powers fall under this umbrella too? If so, that makes the compulsory considerably stronger, and in a sense it all comes together within this theme of forced progression anyway, so it would make sense for them to be one and the same. Plus, it's the nerves that enable Pernida to evolve in the first place, linking these two seemingly disparate abilities together. If evolution stems from the compulsory, then it also allows the user to learn and adapt based on what their nerves touch, even allowing them to replicate abilities and reflexes. This is definitely one of the trickier ones, one of the ones I am less sure of, as you'll see later on when we get to the other Schrift that stems from the power of the Soul King and not Yhwach himself. So do let me know in the comments below how you feel about the compulsory. Do we consider the evolutionary aspect to be a part of this Schrift? And is it even really fair to include these fake Schrifts on the list in the first place? In 7th place, we have one of my personal favourite Schrift, though maybe I'm a little biased due to who it's attached to in the source material, the Death Dealing. Now, there's quite a lot to this Schrift, and it is definitely one of the more layered and complicated abilities in the series. Essentially, the Death Dealing allows the user to control lethal doses, basically here meaning poisons and immunities. The user of the Death Dealing must be killed in a single hit. There is no other way to bring them down for good. The reason is that the user of the Death Dealing can control the lethal dose of anything they ingest a lot of. And I mean anything. Blood, the elements in the air around them, a certain character's reiatsu, and acquire total immunity to the substance in question. For example, when Askin is struck by Yushiro's Shunko, he survives the attack, meaning he is now completely immune to Yushiro's reiatsu and will no longer be injured by him. On the flip side of that, the user is capable of controlling the effects of that same substance in their opponent as well. After drinking his own blood, Askin can then control the lethality of Oetsu's blood in the middle of their battle, nearly killing him by poisoning him from within his own veins. By dialing the lethal dosage of an ingested substance all the way to the other side of the spectrum, the user of the Death Dealing can even go so far as to heal themselves thanks to the substance they've taken on, again as seen by the massive influx of Yushiro's power being used to then restore Askin's wounds. This all adds up to a Schrift that makes its owner practically impossible to kill, while at the same time making the enemy easier to kill. And the user barely has to lift a finger. Instead, they invite danger to come to them. The moment their opponent lands an attack and doesn't successfully finish them off, it is kind of over. The Death Dealing can also be condensed into battle-ready abilities, giving it incredible versatility. The Gift Ball is strong enough to poison captain-level characters, rendering them helpless, while Gift Bad does the same thing, but across a portion of the ground itself. The Death Dealing is all about luring enemies into a trap that then completely flips the fight in your favour, And it's for this reason that despite being so unassuming, Askin leaves behind him a string of defeated enemies with ease. In 6th place we have the X-axis, the very first Schrift bestowed by Yuhabuk. The X-axis is all about doing damage in a truly terrifying way. Now, I know we've been trying to separate the Schrift from the Sternritter and will continue to do so, but I wonder how that actually works in this particular instance. Does the sniper rifle come as part of the package with this Schrift or not? Leal mentions that it's his bow, but is that just because it has to be or otherwise? Either way, the user fires blasts from some kind of a ranged weapon, except they're not actually firing anything. Instead, the X-axis simply annihilates everything on that axis from existence between the end of the weapon and its designated target. The X-axis is completely unstoppable. Nothing can block its all-penetrating shot because it's not shooting anything. Matter is quite literally being plucked out of thin air along that horizontal avenue, making it a truly frightening ability to come up against. The X-axis is another scarily easy ability to get the most out of as well. You can seemingly fire it as easily as you can fire your chosen weapon, blasting away with this unblockable beam. This is already pretty broken in itself. And I guess now would be a good time probably to define what I mean by broken, better later than never, I suppose, but it works particularly well with this example. Here, broken means an ability that is extraordinarily powerful with little to no downsides to using it whatsoever, and on the flip side offers virtually no counter or escape for the enemy either. An ability achieving all of this would be what I would consider to be balanced. A broken ability is shifted heavily to one side of that scale. Here, Leal demonstrates the ability to destroy anything and everything, and there is no cost to using it at all. It's not balanced, it is completely within the user's favour. And that's not all either. The true essence of the X-axis makes it even more ridiculous. In the same way the weapon's blasts penetrate everything, the user's body becomes intangible, slipping through everything that comes its way. All weapons phase right through the Schrift's user, making them almost impossible to hurt, let alone kill. Again, this is broken. It is pure benefit, and to an insane degree, I might add, with zero drawbacks, zero cost. Sure, there's this arbitrary rule that Leal needs to come close to death 3 times to activate it properly, but it's hard to know if that's a Sternritter specific thing or if it's actually part of the Schrift itself. Either way, this is a monstrous power. In my opinion, one of only a few abilities capable of killing Gerard Valkyrie. And so we reach the top 5. These are the most broken of the bunch, to the point where they become a little indecipherable, if I'm honest, but we'll try our best. Right, next up we have a Schrift that I think was always respectable, but has only shot up the rankings as of fairly recently. And of course, that's the Yourself. Now, there are 2 Sternritter occupying the Yourself, so I'm going to roll them both into one, under the assumption that there would always be 2 users of the Yourself at any one time, as it doesn't really seem like it would work without that caveat. While we originally knew how this Schrift operated, truthfully we didn't know the extent of its capabilities. And it turns out to be pretty ridiculous. Both users of the Yourself can copy the appearance of someone else, but they specialise in different areas upon doing so. One half of the Yourself copies that person's powers and abilities, while the other half can copy their memories. Or so we thought. In reality, thanks to Club Outside, we discovered the terrifying truth behind the Yourself. The user that copies powers and abilities can copy 100% of those powers and abilities, while only copying 70 to 80% of their target's memories. Meanwhile, the other half copies 100% of the target's memories and only 70 to 80% of their powers. So it turns out that both halves of the Yourself can in fact copy both powers and memories. They aren't mutually exclusive. All that changes is just how much of each one they can mimic. This is already pretty busted, but the fact one half of the yourself can copy 100% of someone else's powers and abilities is absolute insanity, and makes you realise just how wasted Lloyd actually was during the first invasion. We've seen that the brothers were able to copy both Kenpachi and Yhwach, meaning there is likely no limit to who they can mimic. So, with the yourself, you could mimic Yamamoto, for example, and gain access to 100% of the head captain's powers. Of course, this comes with some possible downsides. It doesn't automatically mean you can use them to their fullest potential, and yet, with 70 to 80% of Yamamoto's memories, it's likely you probably can. The yourself is a crazy ability, and one that is totally understated in the source material thanks to how it's used. If Lloyd had copied Yamamoto from the start, it might have been all over. Certainly he would have been wielding enough power to decimate basically every captain there, save for Yamamoto himself. Weirdly, in the source material, we see that Lloyd and Royd had their powers from birth, much like Gerard and Pernida supposedly did, but that seems to have been retconned away as of the anime. To be honest, the yourself is a really difficult one. I don't necessarily feel good about ranking the X-axis at 6th beneath this ability, but then how do you compare to an ability that gives you, automatically, everything that somebody else has? It makes the yourself as strong as the strongest person in the room, so maybe it should be ranked even higher than this. Right, in 4th place, we have a tough one. I mean, they're all pretty hard to rank at this point, let's face it, but this one is one that I'm really unsure about. Were the Sternritter himself to be included in this ranking as well, the miracle might make it all the way to number 1. Instead, I've got it down here in 4th, because I'm not sure the Schrift alone has an answer to any of the top 3 or what they can do. It really is tricky, but let's take a look at what the miracle can do first and foremost. This particular Schrift is very versatile, coming equipped with a plethora of abilities, and once again isn't a true Schrift, but a power that Gerard always possessed due to him being the vessel for the heart of the Soul King. Perhaps the core ability of the miracle is to make the impossible possible for the user. The worse, the lower the odds of success are, the more likely a miracle is to occur for them, and turn the tables for the wielder of this Schrift. And that seemingly extends to anything. So if it looked as though it were impossible for the user of the miracle to defeat any of the Schrift on this list, chances are the user would be granted whatever power necessary to do so. But where it gets really messy for me is how that power stacks up against the likes of the antithesis, or even worse, the balance. Making the impossible possible sounds like the ultimate in good fortune to me. Gerard practically deals in good fortune, meaning the miracle is immensely susceptible to the balance, and seems like one of the worst possible matchups. The same kind of goes for the antithesis as well. No matter what incredible feats the miracle is capable of pulling off, the antithesis can just reverse everything in the blink of an eye, rendering the miracle's probability manipulation completely impotent. So that's a tricky one, but there's even more to the miracle than that. If the user of the miracle takes damage of any kind, their body will transform, utilising God's size to become both bigger and stronger. For example, if the user's arm is cut off, it will return in a flash of holy light, literally bigger and stronger than before. And this extends to the user's entire body, potentially even resurrecting them from death again and again. This is the most broken aspect of the miracle in my opinion. Gerard was killed about 4 separate times during his fight with the Gotei 13 and returned stronger than before every single time, seemingly totally undefeatable save for an act of God. But again, it's tough to know how much of this stems from Gerard being who he is, and how much of it is inherent to the miracle as an ability. The nexus of Gerard's resurrection is his core. As I've said before, he's akin to a Quincy golem, a strange, perhaps artificial or undead being who is being kept alive by the huge Quincy cross in his centre, which Kubo later confirmed was his weakness. Is this core an aspect of the miracle, or is it Gerard specific? Again, like Pernida and the compulsory before him, because the two are intimately linked, even more so than most Sternritter and their Schrift, it is much harder to know. Hoffnung and the powers that come with that sword are another good example. The miracle is infused into Hoffnung, reflecting the hopes of the masses, and so when it's damaged in battle, the masses cry out in despair, and that despair is then carved into the enemy. But in the context of our video today, is Hoffnung even a factor? Or is that a weapon for Gerard himself and Gerard alone? It's for all these reasons that I've elected to place the miracle at number 4, but the brutal truth is that we are in such a ridiculous place now with these powers that on any different day, any of these could realistically win out in the end. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. How does the miracle as a Schrift alone actually work, and how does it stack up to the Schrifts that we're about to talk about? Okay, we've reached the top 3, and this is where it gets really tricky in my opinion. The truth is that positions 2 and 3 are weird and frankly interchangeable. They're 2 of the most nebulous and odd Schrifts in the series, and I kind of feel like either one could swap places at any moment. And speaking of swapping places, in 3rd place, we have the antithesis, which is also just completely and utterly broken. It allows the user to totally reverse events which have taken place between 2 points. While it can be 2 people, it doesn't have to be. It can reverse what's happened between 2 objects or a person and an object, as we see when Uryu flips the positions of Yhwach and a button to help the Quincy King escape from the otherwise inescapable cage of life in the anime. The main problem with the antithesis is that we don't get to see it in action much at all. But you only have to use your imagination to see just how incredible this power really is. When Uryu says that he can reverse events between 2 designated points, I truly believe he means any event between any point. It's alluded to in the source material that the antithesis may be the only power capable of taking on the Almighty, which is insane in its own right, and is likely due to the fact that it could undo the changed future brought about by the Almighty. Though even then, I still think the Almighty is unbeatable even up against that power. In the source material, we see Uryu use the antithesis to turn the tables on Hashwolf, only to have them immediately flipped back upon him, seemingly indicating the antithesis is weaker than or simply can't stand up to Hashwolf's Schrift. But I've always found this to be weird. I mean, why doesn't Uryu just use the antithesis again? Unless it seriously takes it out of him, but he uses it once and then just forgets about it. Hashwolf even instructs him to reverse their wounds once again at the end of the fight, so surely Uryu could have just done that after being savagely injured once more. In my opinion, that may have been the only way to defeat Hashwolf. Since Hashwolf's Schrift actually needs to be activated, Uryu should have waited until he was at death's door before swapping their situations and then killing Hashwolf quickly before he could utilise his own power while massively severely weakened. It's a really tough one, but in my opinion the antithesis comes in 3rd because it does actually have a limitation. albeit not much of one, it can only reverse events that have taken place between 2 points. Whereas I think the next Schrift affects absolutely everything and everyone in its vicinity. And speaking of, in second place, I've got the Balance, another of the series' weirdest powers and one of the toughest to rank. The Balance allows the user to collect, dispense, and redistribute misfortune to those that have experienced good fortune. This is easily one of the most abstract Schrifts in Bleach, but therein lies its power. It's honestly just easiest to use examples from the source material for this one. Hashwolf attempts to kill Kangdu by cleaving his head from his shoulders, but Kangdu uses the iron to successfully block Hashwolf's blade. While this saves Kangdu's life, it is considered good fortune that he survived the attack. And as noted earlier by Yuhabak, this is on top of the good fortune he already experienced by having survived Hitsugaya's earlier attack as well, and so all of this good fortune that Kangdu has accumulated is placed on the scales of balance and converted into misfortune, which empowers Hashwolf and rains down upon Kangdu, enabling Hashwolf to kill the Sternritter in a single hit. In the anime, Yuhabak leaving the Cage of Life to go and face Ichibei is considered good fortune for the rest of the Zero Division in that they don't have to face him, and so Hashwolf amasses that collected good fortune and turns it into misfortune, directed at the Cage of Life itself, using that power to break the cage in two. This is one of the crazier examples of the balance in action, as it seems to be a blanket ability that takes everyone and everything within Hashwolf's sphere into account. Much later, during his battle with Uryu, Hashwolf is struck by Uryu's own Schrift, causing him to suffer serious injuries. Yet this counts as both good fortune for Uryu and misfortune for Hashwolf. Hashwolf redirects then his own accumulated misfortune back onto his front shield that he carries into battle with him, while attacking Uryu with the own good fortune he just experienced before doubling down on the attack with the collected misfortune dispensed from his shield. It's a little confusing, but all in all it basically means that nothing bad can happen to the user of the balance, and nothing good can happen to those in their vicinity. Now, the front shield complicates matters a little bit. Is that something inherently born out of the balance? Is it created by the Schrift? Or is it an accessory unique to Hashwolf himself, as we are trying to separate the two here, and the shield clearly amplifies the balance's abilities? Either way, the balance is clearly broken. I mean, what's the solution? Hashwolf is only taken down by Yuhabak in the end, otherwise I see no way to overcome this Schrift on its own. Any misfortune that the user should experience can be converted into good fortune for them, and vice versa for the opponent. And unlike the antithesis, which is already absurdly strong, the balance doesn't seem to have any limits. Hey, let's keep the segues going. Speaking of not having any limits, in my opinion, without the Almighty in play, there was only one option for the #1 spot: the Visionary. This is a very simple ability yet again, and yet it is easily one of the most broken and absurd in all of Bleach. Honestly, probably only second overall to the Almighty itself. The Visionary turns imagination into reality, and that's it. There's no limits, no shackles, nothing holding it back bar your own imagination. Anything the user can imagine becomes real, whether that's conjuring a meteor with the force necessary to wipe out the Seirete, or ripping open the vacuum of space itself, or even going so far as to create life. Fully autonomous life with their own set of abilities and powers, and then being able to snuff that life out like it was nothing without so much as lifting a finger. Yes, the Visionary is completely busted, and it's on a totally different level. Throughout this video, I've been doing my best to separate the Schrift from the Sternritter, but here, the Sternritter actively makes this Schrift worse. Gremmy simply doesn't have the mind necessary to utilize the Visionary's true potential, which is really the only way Kubo could keep this power even remotely grounded. In reality, another more capable user would have just wielded the Visionary to blink every single captain, every single member of the Gotei 13 out of existence from the moment they stepped onto the battlefield. The only reason the Almighty is stronger than the Visionary is that Yhwach can rewrite his own death, meaning he always stays one step ahead of everyone, pretty much no matter their ability. If Gremmy were to imagine Yhwach's death, it would occur, but Yhwach would simply return time and time again. Though admittedly, I do wonder what would happen if the user of the Visionary imagined Yhwach's Almighty not working at all, or not working in the future. Would that counter it? But yeah, there's not really a lot to say. The proof is right in front of you. The Visionary is disgustingly broken, but also a lot of fun. It's funny to see how Kubo had to conceive of a way of shackling this power to see how narratively he bent over backwards to make Gremmy the worst possible wielder of the Visionary, when truthfully it should be completely unstoppable. The fact that someone wielding this Schrift can clone themselves, but totally independent of themselves, is insanity. They can create and erase life in such a nonchalant way, among other things, that this power absolutely treads upon the territory of godhood. We've come so far from even just the original entries on this list that they almost look quaint by comparison. Even the likes of the Miracle wouldn't top the Visionary. It's just that good. Alright, but that's it for my list of the top 13 most broken Schrifts in Bleach. We attempted to separate them from their Sternritter counterpart, but like I said going in, this was a tough one to make. Let me know if you agree with my picks at all, or if you think there are some glaring omissions. Let me know your thoughts down below either way. I've been recording this video for so long now that the sun is starting to go down outside, so I think we will wrap things up there. As always, thank you so very much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed it and took something of value away from this video today as well. And as always, I want to end the video by saying a massive thank you and giving a huge shout out to my wonderful supporters over on Patreon, without whom I wouldn't be able to keep doing this. So again, I am so very grateful. If you love what I do here over on YouTube and you want to help support the channel and me that extra step further, you can do just that by visiting the link to my Patreon down in the description. By supporting me at the $1 level, you can get your name in the credits just like this, and by supporting me at $2 or up, you can get every single video I release absolutely free of baked-in YouTube ads. Either way, thank you so very much for the support. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.